When we think of Charles Dickens, our mind immediately goes to the Victorian era, because somehow Charles Dickens is the Victorian era. And Queen Victoria, whose reign was the longest in British history, was herself a big fan of Charles Dickens. She gave a copy of A Christmas Carol as a Christmas gift to the members of her family. And she herself established the tradition, first of all, of making Christmas a special holiday for children, and a moment to reflect, to think about the life our children live in our society. And the Victorian era was a hard time for children. If we think of the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, we immediately have to consider that without the labor force of children, industrialization could never have happened in Britain. It's just a matter of figures. There were not enough people to go and work in factories. If the children had not been involved in manufacturing, in factory working, there would not have been enough labor force. But children were exploited. Children were exploited because they could be paid less than adult people, and so could women, because capitalists could pay way less money for the labor force of children and women than of men. Let's think of the fact that people, working class people, workers, were forced to live up to 16, 18 hours per day during the Victorian era, which became a major theme of the fight for workers' rights. These are the years when pollution started to destroy the health in urban towns. Let's think of the fact that Britain was the most highly urbanized country in that era. England changed its face from an agricultural country to an industrial one. A lot of people, most British people, moved to the new industrial towns which were starting to flourish, especially in the north of England. Let's think of the triangle made of Manchester, Liverpool and Chester. This is the north of England, very close to Scotland. But the life expectancy became lower. The average age was 44 before the Industrial Revolution. Then it went down, it went critically down. This was because of pollution. And the death rate among children was very high, because these people who came to live in these new industrial towns, and London was one of them, obviously, especially the eastern part, the east end of London was far poorer than the west end, and it still is. The slums where these new areas were overcrowded houses without current water, with a high crime rate, pollution. The water itself was polluted because water was necessary to provide the factories with energy, the use of a windmill, the use of engines which used the force of the current water floating in a river. But rivers were also polluted with the waste, the industrial waste, which was really poisonous. And that was the same water that people used to cook, water they used to drink. So it's very easy to understand how hard it was to live in such polluted towns. Charles Dickens was one of the victims of this new urban society. His father was sent to jail because he was not able to pay some debts he had. He was allowed to take with him most members of his family, and Charles had a lot of siblings. But Charles himself, who turned 13 when his father went to prison, was not allowed to go to prison, and he had to go and find himself a job in a factory. It was hard for him to leave his education, to leave school and go and work, go and find. The idea of children without the opportunity to have a proper education became a constant in Dickens's novels. The exploitation of children, the idea that the state did not do enough to protect the children became one of his major themes. Charles Dickens is the father of social novels because his novels dealt with the social injustice of his time. And he was really harsh towards the corruption of the government, towards the English policy, which did not protect enough especially children, women and children. Workhouses were not enough. Workhouses were terrible places where poor people in general, and especially orphans, had to be kept. Children without the loving support of a family, eventually because their father had lost his job or because he did not have enough money to afford giving food, providing all his family with enough food. But living in workhouses meant to work really, really hard. It implied for a child to be exploited. The exploitation of children was the main theme in Dickens's novels. And why is he the father of the so-called social novel? Dickens follows a period in English literature which is defined as Romanticism. Romanticism is based on the idea of emotion versus reason, feelings instead of thoughts, and the centrality of the individual. somehow romantic poets and romantic novelists did not deal much, were not so fond of social problems. Dickens upturns this perspective and goes back to the urban life, the problems of urban life. So it does not come as a surprise that when the Great Exhibition took place in 1851 and Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, was so proud, actually all English people were so proud of this exhibition, which took place in London in the mythical Crystal Palace, which then got destroyed. There's no trace of this Crystal Palace anymore, but it was, you can imagine it as a huge building which collected stuff from all over the British Empire, and the British Empire during the Victorian age was really enormous. 1/4 of the world was under the British domination. English people were so proud, but Charles Dickens said, okay, it is fine to hold such a huge thing as a great exhibition, but now we should think of a second exhibition, an exhibition of what goes bad in England, a second exhibition of the social injustices which have been caused by the Industrial Revolution, because the Industrial Revolution meant that rich people, the former gentry, people who owned a lot of lands in the country, have now turned to capitalists. They own the factories and they get richer and richer. But what happens to the poor part of society? What happens to the working class people? They become poorer and poorer. Their standard of life decreases instead of improving. This is what Charles Dickens is interested in showing.
Most of these children begin in negative circumstances and rise to happy endings through the mediation of a benefactor, which resolve the contradictions in their life created by the adult world. Benefactors indicate that, according to Dickens, no real revolution was necessary to solve the contradictions of industrialization. Society would be better if all women and men stood up for the rights of the poor, especially children. Children needed a proper education to avoid poverty. In A Christmas Carol, the spirit of Christmas present introduces the protagonist, Ebenezer Scrooge, to two children, a girl, want, and a boy, ignorance. He says, "The boy is ignorance, the girl is want. Beware them both, and all of their degree, but most of all beware the boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased."
Will you show me this? What has it to do with me?
Are they not of the human race? Look here, beneath my robe. Look upon these.
What are they?
They are your children. They are the children of all who walk the earth unseen. Their names are ignorance and want. Beware of them. For upon their brow is written the word doom. They spell the downfall of you and all who deny their existence.
Have they no refuge, no resource?
Are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons?
Cover them.
Dickens's novels were published in installments, 1 or 2 chapters a week or a month, usually on a magazine. His novels dealt with major social problems of industrialized England, such as the miseries of prostitution, the exploitation of children, the terrible living conditions in slums, corruption in government, the world of the workhouses founded upon the idea that poverty was a consequence of laziness, the abuses on children in workhouses, the great importance given to strict utilitarian education, the dangers of letting children become like small calculating machines, unable to use their imagination or follow their heart and feelings. Dickens's description of Coketown is interesting and very important. He brings out a variety of images to present the atmosphere in the novel. Coketown is described as a town with many buildings and factories, all very much alike. Dickens's description of people, places and the skyline of Coketown is a perfect manifesto of what modern alienation means. It was a town of red brick, or of brick that would have been red if the smoke and ashes had allowed it. But as matters stood, it was a town of unnatural red and black, like the painted face of a savage. It was a town of machinery and tall chimneys, out of which interminable serpents of smoke trailed themselves forever and ever. It had a black canal in it, and a river that ran purple with ill-smelling dye. It contained several large streets, all very like one another, and many small streets still more like one another, inhabited by people equally like one another, who all went in and out at the same hours, with the same sound, upon the same pavements, to do the same work, and to whom every day was the same as yesterday and tomorrow, and every year the counterpart of the last and the next. Utilitarianism is based on facts and leaves no room for imagination. Dickens provides 3 examples of this utilitarian logic in Hard Times. The first, Mr. Thomas Gradgrind, a man of facts, was the principal of a school in Coketown. He believed in utilitarianism and instilled this philosophy into the students at the school from a very young age, as well as his own children. Utilitarian educators saw children as small machines just waiting to be filled with information. They did not consider, however, the children's need for imagination, fiction, poetry, and other arts that are used to expand children's minds, all of which are essential today in order to produce well-rounded human beings through the educational process. But Mr. Gradgrind, 2 oldest children, Tom and Louisa, are examples of how this utilitarian method failed miserably. To grind means to crush between 2 hard surfaces. To grind symbolizes what he destroys. He is the one who destroys children's fantasies and thoughts. Everyone around Mr. Gradgrind becomes brainwashed. He's exactly like a machine. Machines are programmed according to what is necessary for them to know. A brain that works like a machine sticks to its facts and does never question anything. This is exactly how Mr. Gradgrind is, and it is also the way he teaches his pupils. He is a machine himself, which has the duty to turn people into realists. In the Victorian age, scientists started giving the answers to a lot of big questions, such as our origins. People's imaginations were being shot down by specific facts and new branches of science such as biology, anthropology, chemistry, physics, and astronomy. Dickens cleverly added in circus people in Coketown as a contrast to the utilitarian approach to life. The circus people are simple, open-minded human beings whose goal in life is to make people laugh. These people are hated by Gradgrind, Bounderby, and other utilitarians because they represent everything that is banned in utilitarianism, such as love, imagination, and humor. Sissy Jupe, the daughter of a circus man, was taken in by the Gradgrinds to live in their home. She is representative of the circus people with her innocence and free will, qualities which are lacking in the lives of the people around her. In class, Gradgrind calls her by a number, girl number 20, instead of using her name, and asks her a definition of a horse. Although she's a circus girl, she has never looked to horses in a scientific perspective and turns out to be unable to give a proper scientific definition, unlike Bitzer, the model pupil whom Gradgrind has created. Gradgrind, Bitzer, and Sissy are the three outstanding characters in Hard Times.
And in this school, you'll be brought up in it too. Stick to facts, sir. That is your charge here. Girl number 20. Who is that girl? I don't know that girl.
Sissy Jupe, sir.
Sissy is not a name. Don't call yourself Sissy. Call yourself Cecilia.
But his father always calls me Sissy, sir. He always did.
Then he has no business to do it. Tell him he mustn't. Who is your father?
He belongs to horse riding, if you please, sir.
We don't know anything of the horse riding here. Don't tell us of that. And tell him there must be no more Sissy. Give me your definition of a horse. Girl number 20, unable to define a horse. Girl number 20, possessed of no facts in reference to one of the commonest of animals. Some boy's definition of a horse. Yours.
Quadruped, graminivorous, 40 teeth, namely 24 grinders, 4 eye teeth and 12 incisors. Sheds coat in spring, and in marshy countries sheds hooves too. Hooves hard and requiring to be shod with iron. A horse, sir.